purchases. You still get 50 purchases from repeat buyers. That hasn't changed. So you're not getting less repeat buyers than you were before. You got 50 yesterday, you get 50 today, but you got 100 new buyers. Well, all of a sudden your repeat purchase rate went from 50% to 30%, 33.3%, right? And if you're watching that one too much, you're going to say, oh man, why aren't people coming back and buying from us? And this is what I see people say all the time. It's like, they're still buying in just the same amount of rate that they were before. And the difference is your metric is just not a very effective metric at telling you much about what's really going on with the business. On the flip side, if all of a sudden you started, let's say, an SMS program, so you've been doing emails to your customers, and now you flip on SMS and you start doing text messages, and those repeat buyers start coming back in greater numbers, and so you go from 50%, 50 purchases to 60 purchases, but you haven't necessarily invested.
How different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it wouldn't change if nothing else really did? Subscribe and hit this like button and share this with a friend. Hey, this is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. This is Christian D. Evans coming at you. I thank you so much for listening to this. We interview top level 8 and 9 figure entrepreneurs, business owners, and CEOs that have either had an exit or they are actually running and scaling their business to that $1 billion valuation. We've also interviewed top level TEDx speakers as well as incredible psychologists, also a lot of wealth managers that manage $1 billion to $200 billion and more. We've had incredible guests like Sachin Kajarian, Cameron Harold, Jay Abraham, and so many others. So if you find this of value, then share this with a friend. And we really appreciate it. Guys, show our guests some love by liking this and subscribing. And guys, until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can, and enjoy the episode. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. This next man acquired and did incredible acquisitions of 13 acquisitions that help him scale and produce incredible results. He is also the CEO and founder of Elumynt, he's also an author, an entrepreneur, fast company, Shopify, and he's an e-com expert in this industry. When Facebook did and iOS did all their updates, guess what he did? He didn't pivot oh my gosh, what the hell's going on? He went out there and scaled even faster, quicker, and a lot of his clients did so as well with his leadership. Now he's been top publication where he writes about e-com advertising leadership, where he's not working, he's usually hanging out with his family and so much. He's also helped scale Sellbrite, a SaaS company, now that also got acquired by GoDaddy, which focuses on multi-channel e-commerce growth and man. He's worked with companies like Nike, Nickelodeon, Humana, Jack Daniels, Allen, Duluth Trading Company, Aerosmith, and so much more. Please welcome the CEO and founder of Elumynt, William Harris. How you doing today, William?
Doing great. Thanks, Christian.
Well, man, I'm really excited about diving into this because, see, with what we were talking about before on our podcast, before we jumped on here, is really just increasing the profits of e-commerce, really just the different tactics and strategies. One of the things that I didn't mention that I really want to mention now is, you recently helped a client earn 5,600%. 5,601% return on ad spend on Facebook ads. You also double our organic traffic, 120% increase month over month. And so William, you obviously know what the hell you're doing. You've been able to help a lot of these companies scale. And so I think a lot of tactics and strategies that you're implementing, they're not known by other digital marketing. And so if you could just share maybe a few things that for our audience that you're doing that they're not optimizing.
I love it. That probably couldn't be a more open-ended question. So I will try to take a break here and pause every once in a while. I think you called out the iOS 14 issues as that. And so I'll use that as a segue before we get into the increasing profitability this year. One of the things that we noticed, even prior to iOS 14, so before that, there was what's called ITP 2.3. And I hope I don't go too technical for everybody here. But this came out, I believe it was in September of 2020. So a couple months before iOS 14 dropped. And that's when Google Analytics changed the most. So without going too much into the depth of what was happening there, that's when a lot of the attribution changed for Google Analytics, which didn't get as affected by iOS 14, but it was a precursor to this. And so it was around that time that we made sure that all of our clients were already set up with what's called CAPI, Conversions API. And I think that's pretty standard now. Most people are familiar with that. If you're not, you definitely want to set it up. But the benefit, I think, to a lot of these changes, ITP 2.3 and iOS 14, was that I think it increased the technical necessity of a lot of advertisers. Before that, I think you could just be mildly creative and throw something in, and if it wasn't set up all that well, it was okay. You were still likely going to do pretty well. What happened as a result of this was you did need to make sure that you were setting up, for instance, your conversions API better. You did need to take a little bit more time in making sure that your campaigns and audiences were set up correctly based on what that was happened as a result of that. So what we did was we started going back to how we evaluated things in, let's say, old school. If you go back to a billboard, how did you know if that billboard was effective? You didn't have clicks. You didn't have anything that told you that, well, you could maybe use a coupon code sometimes, right, or something along those lines, but it wasn't as easy to track. And so we started doing geologic holdout tests, which I can go into a little bit more later if we want. But the idea was, let's actually measure the real actual dollar amount. Ignore what the platform says for a moment. If you spend more money, do you actually get more money? And if that happens, and you do that this week, then next week, and the week after, you do that 13 times in a row, you start to move beyond just correlation to say there's probably a causation that's taking place here as well. And if you do it in a more controlled environment, you can kind of determine that a little bit better. Since we were already doing that, when iOS 14 dropped, it didn't impact us the way that it impacted other people. And so we scaled significantly for all of our clients because we were already set up and ready to hit the ground running, almost as if we could just ignore what the platform said to a point.
So let's dive into this a little bit, because what I'm noticing is your marketing agency, Elumynt, works with a lot of the AI and machine learning aspects behind it. So let me ask you, how do you leverage a lot of these data points to focus on the right KPIs that will actually move the needle further? Definitely when there's and specifically in e-com, but with any business really, there's a ton of fixed but also variable costs that go into. Obviously ad costs go up, obviously shipping and everything like that. Everything is adjusting constantly. And so you want to make sure your profit margins are on point. And obviously those are kind of smaller profit margins anyways. So I just love for you to walk through that a little bit on how you as an agency obviously are able to be totally different than all the other digital marketing agencies leveraging the AI and machine learning.
Yeah, and I think there's a few different types of, let's say, AI and machine learning. There's what Facebook has, what Google has, and I'd say those are some of the most advanced AIs that exist in our planet right now. And so part of this means don't get in the way of those AIs. There's also things that we've built in-house that we're working towards, right? In ways we use those tools too to help supplement what's going on there. But one of the things that I would say even before iOS 14 that I saw a problem with is a lot of people would get in the way of the most advanced AIs, which would be Facebook or Google's algorithm and some of the things that they're doing. They would try to get in the way of that by not using it the way that it was meant to be used. Example of this is Facebook knows so much more information about your prospective buyer than you have the ability to even try to manipulate that. And let's say that Facebook knows if Christian, if all of a sudden you start looking at a specific type of coffee, Facebook knows that you're looking at this coffee, whereas I don't know that you're looking at coffee. Now I could completely misprofile you. I could say that I'm looking for people who like poetry and whatever else. And I'm putting this picture of who I think my customer persona might be, and completely exclude you from my targeting, and you're actively looking for it. And I think that's one of the things that we saw where broad audiences started to do better on Facebook. And this is even before iOS 14, and even post as well. But allowing that algorithm to do what it needs to do to find the right next person that's coming in the door. You mentioned the profitability, and we can get into that part too. That's what allows, that's the start of allowing profitability. Now, here's where you get into manipulating that algorithm, though, to your benefit. There are ways, let's say that you have a few different types of products, and let's say that within your catalog of products, Some of them have a lot higher margins than others. And that's not true for every business, but some businesses it is. Well, if you are just setting a flat, let's say ROAS goal, return on ad spend, or a flat CAC, customer acquisition cost goal across your entire catalog, you might not actually be getting the most profitable. You might be over indexing on acquiring the products that have a lower actual margin for you, versus if you are willing to spend a little bit more on those higher margined items, you might make actually more profit from those, even though you're spending more to acquire those purchases. Does that make sense?
It does. If you could unpack that for our audience a little bit further so that we do what we're tracking.
Yeah. So let's say that you've got an item for $100. Let's say that you have another item that sells for $30. And let's say you have another item then that also sells for $100. So let's say we've got three items. Two of them are $100 and one of them's $30. Let's say on the first $100 item, you have, let's say based on your margins, you make a profit of $20 on that one, right? So when it's all factored and said, there's $20 of profit, you could spend basically up to $20 to acquire that customer, break even for that purchase. If you have, let's say the $30 one, let's say that your profits and margins on that are $15 when it's all said and done. So it's a lot cheaper, right? For you, your COGS and everything else on that one. But that means that you can still only spend up to $14 to acquire that one. And then let's say on the third $100 item, your margin, your profit off of that, your unit profit would be, let's say, $50 on that item. In theory, if you just say you want a flat customer acquisition cost of $20 because you just averaged everything out and you said, hey, at $20 on average, we're good. The only downside to that is that if they're acquiring that second product, you're actually losing money on that one to acquire that customer. Now that we're talking month zero, and I'll get into what I mean by month zero in a minute, but you're losing money on that purchase if they bought the $30 one where you only have $15 profit off of that. You acquired them for $20, you lost money. If you had the $100 one that he had the $20 profit on, you're breaking even. But then you have this other one that you're making money off of that you have $50. You could spend, in theory, you could spend $40 to acquire that customer, still make $10 profit. And by being able to spend $40 to acquire that customer instead of just $20, you might be able to amplify the total volume amount that you're able to get. So instead of 10 purchases where you make $50 in profit off of each one of those purchases, right? You could get 1,000 purchases at $10 profit. Overall, that's more total profit dollars from that. So it's one of the ways that we can look at segmenting catalogs to be able to identify ways to increase your profit overall from this.
I see what you're saying, because see, in e-com, you just got to look at the metrics and say, okay, hey, you know what, this one could work. Margins are slightly different, but it's a quantity game versus this one where the margins look good and like, okay, this makes more sense. We can spend more money to acquire a customer, but the reality of that offer, maybe you just have less quantity running. And so then at the end of the day, once you actually, in a 30-day or 60-day time, that money's not actually that you realize that money's actually not as profitable compared to, obviously, like you said, with that smaller margins. So let me ask you this, because how much do you rely, because I know as a digital marketing you're leveraging all these metrics, and I know cost per click has gone up definitely off of ad spend as well as YouTube and in Google as well, and so the front end is pretty tough, but also it's still very profitable. How much do you rely on digital sales funnels in the e-com world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that it's going to vary depending on the brand, right? And that's such a cliched answer. Oh, it depends. That's true for everything. I hate it, but it does. For some brands, they maybe have a really great organic presence already. We have one brand that just absolutely crushes it on YouTube. They have tons of great YouTube content. And as a result, they maybe don't depend on paid as much as some of the other brands do. If you're newer, and you don't have as much organic stuff going, then paid ends up becoming a lot more important. I would argue, though, and this is somewhat biased because we run an advertising agency, that you should be somewhat aggressive on it, and that if you're not, then you're literally just leaving money on the table. Meaning, this does become a math problem where if you do say, hey, every time you hand this digital advertising machine $10, it hands you back $20 in profit. Why wouldn't you just maximize that? Every time that you don't do that, you're just leaving money on the table. And so I would say you should spend as much as you can profitably. And I mentioned the month break even or the month zero thing. That's where you can lose money on month zero if you know what your, let's say, 90-day LTV is on a customer, and know that within the next 3 months on average, you're going to make X amount based on them returning. And so that's a cash flow thing that worked very well in the last couple of years. Probably a little less well right now as we potentially head into what seems to be a recession. You might want to be a little bit more conscientious about cash flow and that. But if the numbers are there and the repeat purchases are there and the numbers seem to be still stacking up, you can go after that.
Well, that's one of the things, and I appreciate you bringing this up. So what I've realized is obviously the cost to acquire customers, sometimes you may go negative. And that's one of the reasons why I've learned, and I've never been big in the e-com space, but one of the things I've learned from a lot of these individuals I've talked to on this podcast is they leverage a lot of the digital sales funnels naturally to help increase the average cart value, of course. So now what happens is, hey, you may lose money on the front end. You've acquired a customer now, but you're still getting only 2 or 3. Now that's a lot of direct response. Now, do majority of larger companies you're working with, and you're talking Nike and Duluth, they don't look more of a direct response where they're trying to acquire and scale in a digital funnel, but it's more of, like you mentioned, kind of a longer time scale, saying, hey, you know what, we've acquired, we maybe acquired that one customer very inexpensively, or maybe made some profit, but over a 90-day or 60-day window. How do they play differently than what I just mentioned, which is the direct response sales funnels?
Yeah, I think the direct response tainted all businesses for a while. And I want to say it was about 2 years ago that Adidas actually came out with a really great article about the overemphasis that even they placed on direct response because we had this immediate feedback, and we're all addicted to that dopamine rush that we get from, ding, notification, ding, immediate feedback, ding, ROAS, I can see it, I can track it. We think that it's one-to-one. And what happened was we got carried away with some of the wrong types of advertising then that was focused on that immediate payback without thinking about the long-term effects of this, which does get into a lot of the branding type things that help somebody to fall in love with a brand. And one of the examples that I talk about, the way that I like to think of everything like relationships. I think those are some of the best ways that we can understand everything in life. If I came home and the only thing that I said to my wife was hey, we need to get this thing done. Don't forget, we need to also do this. Hey, we've got this to do too. And that was the only conversation I had with my wife was very transactional. There's not a lot of romance there. On the flip side, that's what I think that we do with a lot of customers right now is somebody buys, and as digital advertisers, our first response is, great, let's retarget them to buy more. And it's like, well, wait a minute, make them fall in love with you a little bit. Why don't you romance them just a little bit? Show them something about why this is exciting, why this matters. They're excited about this purchase they just made. They're emotionally excited about this purchase. How do you get them to fall in love with your brand? And so, when you talk about, let's say, bigger brands and where are they going and what are they thinking about, I'm thankful that I see a shift towards people putting an emphasis back on that piece of advertising again, because I think it got away from us for a while.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing this up because I do know that's like long-term thinking versus short-term. However, though, I do know obviously in the e-com, because your margins are small, you'll always look return on ad spend within a week, right? Hey, okay, if I put $1 in, am I making 2, 3? Because otherwise I'm not staying in business, 2 weeks from now, right? Now with those larger companies, they have, like you mentioned, more of a cash flow situation where, okay, hey, I can withstand a loss for a period of time for 90 days. I can still make payroll. And obviously now, long term, I know that the numbers will work out. So it is a longer term mindset. But however, like you said, on the front end, I love that example as well of transactional versus relational, right? Because we
Right.
understand if you really want to build a larger brand, 8, 9-figure, brand, right? It's going to take that more relational aspect. So with that being said, and for a lot of our listeners that are like, okay, I'm in that transactional, that's not good. Okay, how do I kind of how do I go more to that relational aspect without decreasing my cash flow and hurting my flow too much? What would you suggest? And I'm talking about like community building, things like that, facilitating, training, relationships, stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think part of this starts to come down to I'm a numbers guy. I memorized pi out to 59 digits on my way to work one day. I like math. I like science, right? Just last week, there was an article that was released about the official documentation of anyons, which are these two-dimensional particles. I was excited. I was elated, and it's such a nerdy thing to be excited about, right? But that's where my mind goes, and so from my mindset, it starts coming down to the metrics. You need to look at your metrics first to understand how does this impact what you're going to do and where you can invest. And so this comes down to thinking through, if you can only afford a month to break even of 0, you need to be profitable on month 1, then that's something to be aware of and at least look at. And so that you might have to dip into your profitability for month 0 a little bit, but you can't go too much because you still have to at least make sure that you're breaking even that month or something to that effect, or you're making profit. But if you look at your 60-day LTV, 90-day, 180-day, you can start to get an idea of where is the tipping point for you and how much can you afford based on cash flow. Sometimes this is why VC-backed or private equity-backed groups have the cash flow to invest in that, to acquire that market share, maybe at a negative return at first, because they know that the payback is going to be in it a little bit later. So you have to remember that you're competing against those people then in your auctions for ads. They're willing to spend $20 to acquire the same customer that you're only willing to spend $10 for. You have to be aware of that too. But I would say the key then is, once you figure out what those numbers are, then you just try to figure out, what does that look like in the long term for you from a payback perspective, and start measuring that. And you mentioned, without impacting cash flow too much. And I'd say that's kind of like saying, how do I romance my wife without, spending any money on our date? Let's just use the coupon for Arby's and we're good to go. That's going to take care of it, right? And it's like, well, maybe, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to take an investment in both time and money a little bit. And if you can't invest as much money right now, then invest in time. And an example of that is, one of the best dates I ever had with my wife. I put together this was a time when we weren't doing as well with the business, as every entrepreneur has had those moments where you're starting up and there's nothing there. But I put together a playlist of a bunch of songs that were from our early dating days, and one of them is Dancing in the Moonlight, and I literally just had like my iPod with that song going, and we danced in the moonlight at the house that I had first asked her to be my girlfriend at, right? And so it's like, there wasn't a whole lot of money spent there, but the emotional connection was there, the time investment was there. And so if you can't on the financial side, then figure that out. And so you brought up communities. One of the things that I see people doing very well on the community building side is, there's a lot of people that have VIP Facebook groups, especially, I'd say this is very true in businesses that have a lot of repeat buyers, especially apparel, right? So now if you have your VIP group on Facebook and you know that you're going to drop all these new clothes for this season, those people jump on them a ton. And here's what's brilliant about that. Because they start buying them a lot, there's a lot of positive buying signals on that page, conversion rate, etc. Facebook is looking at the conversion rate of people on that page. Now, when you use that URL as an ad, it has data there to support that, yes, whatever product this is on that page is converting. So it can use that in its algorithm to determine whether or not it should show your ad or an ad for a product that has no conversion data yet, for instance. So those are positive buying signals. Other ways that people will use this right now is TikTok. If you're a brand that's B2C and you're not investing some time into developing your content plan on TikTok, you're missing out. You see all the people that have millions of followers on Instagram or something along those lines. That happened years ago when the algorithm allowed that to take place. That still happens on TikTok. You can go from an absolute nobody to hundreds of thousands of followers almost overnight on TikTok still right now. And so capitalize on that. Find those channels where you can still do that.
Well, one thing you mentioned, and I think a lot of smaller companies don't realize the impact, because a lot of these Duluth and Nike and so forth, they have a hard time keeping a really strong community because there is no personal touch, right? Sometimes, and it's hard to have that. So it's not that they can't. I've seen some that really dominate very well with it. It's just that I think that is a missed opportunity for some of these smaller brands, even 7, 8 figures, that you can build a strong, immense, beautiful community compared to some of those bigger players. And so that, find those opportunities, just like you were saying, and go down, double down into it. Now, you're talking about KPIs, and I always love to ask a lot of successful entrepreneurs, because see, what I've realized definitely when I scaled my first business, I was measuring things that were irrelevant to the actual growth of the company. And I didn't know that. I was just like, okay, this is what I should be measuring. And then there were some measurements that I was not measuring that I should have been measuring quite a while. And so obviously that comes with obviously, coaching and other, things. My question, William, is after looking at hundreds upon hundreds of large companies, small companies, mid-sized companies, and their KPIs, what are you noticing are like the vanity metrics? And I know obviously it depends, right? I get it 100%, but I would love to just talk about maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 KPIs that you find are like the big red alerts, like, okay, hey, this doesn't really matter. But these are the KPIs that we should be focusing on, because at the end of the day, this is what you want.
The number one for me that absolutely disgusts me is ROAS, ROAS, return on ad spend. And the biggest reason for this, there's several reasons for this, even before all the iOS 14 stuff. Let's say that you're a marketing agency, or let's say that you tell your marketing agency that you need a ROAS of 5. Let's say that they're currently at a 4, but you're saying, I need a 5 in order for us to be good. The problem with that is that agency, they can just increase, let's say, the frequency that they're retargeting people. So people that have already been to your website, have already made a purchase before, or maybe they haven't made a purchase, they just visited the website, and they're going to increase the amount that they're going to spend there. It will be able to take credit for more purchases, but that doesn't mean that it actually drove more purchases. And the way that I equate this is, let's say that I'm in a line at a coffee shop, and I say, hey, I can send you some more customers to your coffee shop. And you say, sounds great. Let's go for it. And rather than me going outside the coffee shop to bring new people in, I go to the people that are in line at your coffee shop and say, hey, you should buy this coffee. It's really great. Best coffee I've ever had. And they're like, thanks. I'm about to do that. Maybe there was somebody that was about to leave and I convinced them that they should stay, right? Because there's a few of those, but most of those people were already going to buy the coffee. How incremental was that? But now you just paid me some money to do what was likely there. A lot of the people that came to your website, yes, you need to retarget them, but there's a limit to how effective that is and how many of those people were already going to purchase. But now if I get to take credit for it, it's going to make it look like I'm doing much better. And so I might get that return on ad spend to a 6 without driving significantly more revenue for your business. And so now you might think that you're in a better spot within the ads platform, but you're not. And so that's a big part of why I strongly dislike ROAS. Now, post iOS 14, it's even worse because it's not even real data. It's fake data. It's made up data. Somebody buys and let's say only 1 out of 10 purchases is actually going to show up in that conversion because of the way that comes through now to Facebook. And so you're going to think that your return on ad spend is significantly lower than it really is if you're just using ROAS. And so you're going to underinvest in, let's say, the things that are very likely driving the most net new business for you and very incremental.
Wow. That's actually very unorthodox, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So with the ROAS, what you're basically saying is it's not always correctly tracking, and then as well as it's not really the best measurement to say, hey, that we are actually growing and producing. So are there any other metrics? Because obviously you tore up, you punched ROAS right in the face. Are there any other KPIs we should be aware of?
The other one that I'm not a huge fan of is, and everybody has their own name for this, and I don't know that I've seen one that's consistently calling it, but like your returning customer rate, meaning if you look at what the percentage of your customers were today, let's say you get 100 purchases, how many of those were returning customers versus net new, and let's say it's 50%. A lot of these types of ratio metrics, they can be okay, but if you hold too fast to whatever ratio you think that it is, it can lead you into dangerous territory. And here's an example of that one. Let's say that it is 50%. Let's say on average, every day, 50% of the purchases came from repeat buyers and 50% from net new people. Now, let's say that you decide you're going to significantly scale your advertising towards getting a lot of net new people in the door. Well, as a result of that, let's say you still get tomorrow, let's say you get 150 purchases. You still get 50 purchases from repeat buyers. That hasn't changed. So you're not getting less repeat buyers than you were before. You got 50 yesterday, you get 50 today, but you got 100 new buyers. Well, all of a sudden your repeat purchase rate went from 50% to 30%, 33.3%, right? And if you're watching that one too much, you're going to say, oh man, why aren't people coming back and buying from us? And this is what I see people say all the time. It's like, they're still buying in just the same amount of rate that they were before. And the difference is your metric is just not a very effective metric at telling you much about what's really going on with the business. On the flip side, if all of a sudden you started, let's say, an SMS program, so you've been doing emails to your customers, and now you flip on SMS and you start doing text messages, and those repeat buyers start coming back in greater numbers, and so you go from 50%, 50 purchases to 60 purchases. But you haven't necessarily invested in anything more on the top of funnel side for net new customers. So you get 100 purchases tomorrow, but or let's say 110, but 160 of them came from repeat buyers and 40 from new buyers. You're going to look at this and you're going to say, oh, it's 60% for repeat buyers, 40%. We're not doing enough on the top of funnel. When in reality, maybe you're still getting the same amount there. You just increased the bottom part. And so it's one of those metrics that I feel like it could tell you the wrong thing about what's going on.
That's something that I've always known about marketing, which I always found so interesting. I was talking to someone earlier this week on our podcast in regards to, like, it is always in context, right? Because naturally that percentage is, oh wow, it decreased, but obviously we got more customers. Or like, obviously I know as well, churn rate. We got a 75% churn rate. Well, that means out of 3 customers that we have, 2 of them decide not to renew. That means that, you know what I mean? And so obviously it is very inaccurate if you're not, and that's kind of what you're basically saying, but it's just a very simplified format. And so that's one of the things that I think you're 100% correct on. And that's why I wanted to have a conversation about this, because there are a lot of metrics as we go through life we're not really acknowledging and realizing. And then as well as, one of the things I've always known is you have to understand each company has their own the way they increase the LTV. Is that over a year and that's how you calculate it, or is it over several years that's how you calculate it? Is it like, how do you calculate it? Because it's not a generic thing for everybody. Every company has their own calculation, which is with every metric, is what I found. And like I mentioned as well, is very contextual. Now, what are some KPIs that are the things that really are the driving results? What would you say?
2 of the ones that I really appreciate the most that we refer to often are MER, which is media efficiency rate, and CAC, customer acquisition cost. And the 2 reasons why those ones stand out often as probably 2 of the ones that I appreciate the most are, MER is, I call it the great equalizer. It's essentially kind of like ROAS, but it's for your whole business. It's, you take the total revenue, so everything you see in Shopify, divided by the total ad spend. Those are 2 facts. The revenue is an absolute fact. The money came in. You actually collected that money, and the spend is a fact that actually happened. What the platforms might report can be modeled. It can depend on attribution windows and a lot of other things. So it's not a fact of what happened there, right? But sometimes Google might take credit for purchase, Facebook takes credit for it, email takes credit for it, and Google Analytics will attribute it to organic search. It's still just one purchase. MER then is, as the great equalizer, just simply says, look, in totality of everything that you're doing, are you staying within a healthy range from an overall profitability for your business? And let's say that you need to be at a 4-to-1. If you increase your spend and you stay at an overall 4-to-1, you're still good. If all of a sudden you're getting a lot more sales coming from other sources too, you're at a 5-to-1, 6-to-1, but you're good at a 4-to-1, you might be underspending. And so you can look at this and say, I'm under investing in net new acquisition. We should find ways to continue to invest more of our money into this. And so I think it's a really great way of helping to equalize things. CAC being the other one, customer acquisition cost, because that, again, I think is a little bit overall better than even just looking at ROAS or something to that effect. It's what is that actual cost to acquire that new customer? And if you understand what your 90-day LTV is, or some other version of LTV, like you said, not your 10-year LTV, because you don't have the cash flow to support acquiring a customer that's going to take you 9 years to get a payback on, but 90 days is potentially realistic. Then you can look at that and again figure out, are you under investing in or over investing in acquiring new business?
So with the and I appreciate that. That is immense. And I've never heard of MER. That's actually very unique. I'd love to have a conversation afterwards here, but also cost to acquire customer. Let me ask you, because when I was doing because it was more of a one-call close when I was running my business, it was a one-call close, very simple, very easy, streamlined. So then obviously I can acquire that depending upon obviously how much ad spend. So that was very streamlined. However, though, like you and I were talking about, okay, if you acquire a customer, but maybe it takes a while for them to actually, be acquired, if you will, or actually convert, then how do you actually calculate that? Through attribution and say, okay, they've been in our ecosystem for X amount of time. It cost us X amount of dollars for them to actually buy something. How much do we actually get? And then that's how we calculate it. Help me unpack that for me.
Yeah, one of the ways that we like to look at that then is going to be through some type of a holdout test. This is the easiest way to try to get some data that's going to support that. As a simple way of approaching this, let's say that you pick 5 states that you're going to advertise. Let's say you're not sure if TikTok is going to drive incremental revenue for you, or if it's just going to show it to the same people that are already going to buy, right? And you're like, oh, sure, it's taking credit for it, but like, did I get new purchases that I wasn't getting from Facebook or Instagram? Well, advertise in 5 states and don't advertise on TikTok in 45 states. Look at those 5 states versus those other 45 states. Now, you need to do a good job of picking which those states are. That's where you can kind of get a little bit complicated, because you need to make sure that those 2 groups of ads versus not ads are expected to move in a similar direction. So let's say that 5 states and the 45 states, let's say they're both expected to grow 10% next month. That's the anticipated and they should both be growing at the same rate. And then let's say that you actually look at the results then 2 months later, right? So because you've got a longer attribution. So 2 months later, you look at these results and you see that the groups that you had the advertising in, let's say that they grew 50% in actual revenue, so not attributed, it's just total revenue. In the states that did not have the TikTok ads grew 10%. Well, that difference there, that 50% minus 10%, that's a 40% difference. You can take that then and figure out, well, what's 40% of that revenue then? That's of that increase in revenue. That's what that extra 40%, that's likely what was caused by TikTok, even though TikTok's not going to take credit for that 60 days later. That still happened as a result of that. Now, you do that in a few different ways. One test is not conclusive, but it's at least enough to give you an idea. Run another version of that test, run another version of that test, run another version and another type of test, right? And the more that you do these types of tests, you can determine whether or not something you're doing is actually driving incremental value to the business over a longer period of time.
Yeah, that's what I love about marketing is just there's like you always have to be testing, adjusting, modifying, and optimizing. But like at the end of the day, you have to really set those rules and identify. Okay, this is our equation for this. Now, speaking of equation, one of the things that I thought was really cool on your website was the E equals MC squared, and obviously it's effectiveness equals masters plus communication squared. And I just thought it would just flowed perfectly. So if you could maybe just kind of unpack that for our audience, I thought that was just real nifty.
I appreciate that. There's actually a new version of the website that's almost done here that I'm excited about. That it's much more nerdy than that even. But I think I mentioned before we jumped on a call. Uh, I'm a complete nerd, a science nerd, string theory. I study that stuff in my spare time, whatever spare time entrepreneurs have here. I enjoy science. And so, energy equals mass times light velocity squared. One of the basic equations from Einstein's theory of relativity. I love that equation. It's very simple, but describes so much. And so I wanted to just use that to tie into what we do. And so when you're trying to think about what makes an advertising agency effective, there's a couple of parts here. One of these is going to be they have to know what they're doing. They have to be masters at their craft. If they aren't, a good example that I've run into in just so many ad accounts, even ones that are being run by big agencies that you would think would know the difference, are let's say you're going after trying to get net new people to your website. And let's say that they're calling these campaigns prospecting. But when you look in the actual targeting, the targeting is doing a great job of saying who to include, but it's doing a terrible job of saying who to exclude. And it's maybe only excluding people who, based on the purchase, based on the pixel, have purchased in the last 180 days. Well, let's go back to iOS 14. Remember, iOS 14 for most people, it's not tracking beyond 1 day for them. For another group of those, it's not tracking beyond 7 days for them. So for a significant chunk of that pixel, it's only tracking purchases back, let's say, 1 to 7 days. Well, if you're only excluding people who have previously purchased based on the pixel data, even though you said 180 days, that's not what's happening. And so the majority of the people that are actually in your net new prospecting campaign aren't actually new people, because Facebook's looking at this campaign, this audience that you have, saying, well, Sally bought before 10 days ago, and Joe has never heard of your brand before. Who do I think is most likely to purchase from you? Sally. She just did 10 days ago. So I'm going to show the ad to Sally again, because she's technically in your audience that you're calling prospecting. So that's where, being a master of your craft is absolutely vital. But this is, I think, where a lot of people drop it. There's a lot of people then that don't go that next step of communications. And we put that as the part that's squared, because I think that's almost, if not more important than even just being a master of what you're doing. There's a lot of people that can do a great job with it, but struggle to communicate it. And if you can't communicate that effectively to the people who actually hold the purse strings, you're not going to be able to grow. You have to be able to effectively convince them so they understand why this is the next thing to put the next dollar in, even if the ROAS says it's a 0.5. When you know that it's not, because you're looking at MER and you've done these other tests, because attribution doesn't exist there anymore because of everything that happened with iOS 14, how do you convince them that they need to put that next up? So the communication piece is absolutely vital. And so we spend a lot of time trying to educate clients on things like this. And we actually had a referral recently from a client who said, we are the only agency they've ever worked with that didn't make them feel dumb when we communicated with them. I thought, that's a really great referral. I want referrals like that, where we've obviously taken the time to explain things to people. In a big philosophy that we have here, there's a song by India Arie that I love, where she says, talk to her like you were talking to your granny. And I remind our team of that all the time, where it's like, talk to our clients as if you were talking to your grandma or your grandpa. Would you be short or anything like that? Or would you take the time to maybe draw up a picture, maybe hop on a call, maybe explain it a third time a different way, versus getting frustrated? How do we find ways to communicate effectively and kindly?
Well, one of the things that I love what you're saying here it's just so much. But one of the things that is just like you said, it's really simplifying it for individuals. And one of the things that I get frustrated with a lot of marketers that like say this almost like as a go-to. Oh, we got to test it. We got to test it. We got to test it. But from what you're just basically saying is that from a lot of the test, but also you do a lot of it through analysis and data. It's like we got all this data, you analyze that
Right.
data, and then you'll be able to say, okay, this isn't going to be 100%, but I'm most likely more is more likely going to be effective campaign because of the data that we have. And I think a lot of marketers were like, oh, cool, this is your offer, this is your avatar, cool, let's just start running some campaigns and just test things and you know, all that shenanigans. And the thing is, that's one of the reasons why the churn rate sucks for so many marketing agencies. But obviously that's
Totally.
why you're able to work with a lot of, you know, very well-known companies, because you know and you analyze that data. And that's really what it comes down to. It's just taking your time and energizing. And it's cool that you simplify it, and I'm excited for that new website launch to understand that. That's awesome, dude. William, I appreciate all your immense time today, just talking and unpacking this. I know you went a little technical, but I think that was so valuable for our audience to listen to understand that, instead of the basic, you know, all this other shenanigans that everybody just talks about, really diving deep into understanding that next level of KPIs. And, you know, obviously throwing stones at ROAS, which that's all we hear today. And the reality is it's, I think you said MRE. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. MER.
MER. Yep.
MER, thank you. And then cost to acquire a customer, which is awesome. And so those things are very, very important. William, how can our audience reach out to you? One, they need some help, like, oh man, this guy knows what he's doing. Or two, they just want to be part of what you got going on, man.
Yeah, probably the easiest way if they're looking for actually having us help them would be go to our website, which is elumynt.com. And it is spelled funny. It's ELUM as in Michael, Y as in yellow, N as in Nancy, T as in Tom.com. That wasn't according to the phonetic alphabet, but we'll let it slide, I suppose. And the reason why that's spelled so funny, that was a time, I don't know if you even realize this, Google is a misspelling of the word Google, or the number rather, which is the number Google is GOOGOL, which is 10 to the 100th power. That there was a time when it was cool to misspell things. That's when this was founded, when it was cool to misspell things. But elumynt.com. And then if they just want to interact or something along those lines, it would just be at LinkedIn, which is linkedin.com/WM Harris, HARRIS, or Twitter. .com and I'm at William Harris, but it's WMHARRIS 101.
Awesome. And guys, those links will be in the description to make it easy for you. Literally just copy and paste that, and obviously just click on that so you can reach out to William and his team. And then also always love, just appreciate the amazing conversation, but always love to ask my guest, what is the last few words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience?
Last few words of wisdom are to pull back and look at longer pictures of time. I see so many times where we struggle by looking at day-to-day, week-to-week performance, and those are important to look at. But when things are maybe down or something along those lines, pull back and look at quarter, pull back and look at year over year, things like that. You'll start to see that those data points still overall average out and trend out. And I know that personally, that's even helped me with my entrepreneurship anxiety of that roller coaster of, you know, I'm sure you've seen the meme, right, where it's like, hey, I'm doing amazing, and then it's like, you know, F my life, and then it's, you know, up and down, and that can feel that way anytime that you're starting a business. So just pull back and look at the picture and the overall trajectory.
And guys, that is my friend, CEO and founder of Elumynt, William Harris. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can. Yo, this is Christian D. Evans, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. If you feel and you know that this was valuable to you, please show some love to our amazing guest by liking this, by commenting on this, by making sure that you do a nice 5-star review, and just show some love to our guest. That'd be really awesome. Also, make sure you share this with a friend, a family, a colleague, someone that you believe would
bring value to their life right now. And guys, we just want to say thank you again for just being part of our community. If you want to have more resources, don't be afraid. Go to christianDevons.com. You can actually schedule a phone call with me, or you can send me an email at christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. That's christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. Always love to hear some feedback, and let me know what is the number 1 or 2 things that you are struggling in your business and your life, and we'll make sure we have those conversations. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Devons podcast, and until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers.